Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on behalf of the Alaska Public Media. It's a unique partnership that we have with them that allows us to bring you this show just about every evening. And we are looking at this weather here to be rather active the next 24 to 48 hours, especially across southern portions of the state. It is Tuesday, November 1st. Hard to believe we're already into November. And let's take a look at what we have coming up here. If you want additional weather information, you can always go to weather.gov. That is the National Weather Service's online presence. It brings you to a point-and-click map. You can get forecast, any relevant watches, warnings, or advisories for anywhere in the country. And of note, on this Tuesday afternoon, Detroit and Chicago hit temperatures of 70 degrees here in the beginning of November. We have some red flag warnings out across areas of the Central Plains, and then a scattering of winter weather advisories and a few winter storm warnings for areas of the central and northern Rockies, as well as the Sierra Nevada in California. Well, winter weather is overspreading the southwest area of the state into south central portions as we go into tomorrow. Winter weather advisories and coastal flood advisories are currently in effect for the southwest. This is going to spread accumulating snow into south central areas here for tomorrow, Wednesday. Winter storm warning has been issued for the Klondike Highway, the higher elevations up around White Pass, as we go through Wednesday into Thursday morning. And this early winter-like weather will continue the rest of this week through at least Saturday before we start to see some moderating and slowly warming temperatures, especially over the west side of the state next week. So what do we have going on out there with the various FAA webcams? Dillingham in the southwest is seeing snow and breezy conditions there. They could see several inches, 6, perhaps even more inches of snow. Temperature this afternoon at 19. That snow is going to spread eastward into south central areas, including the Kenai Peninsula, Anchorage Bowl, up through the Susitna and Copper River basins. Willow, clear at least this afternoon, 18 degrees, plenty of cold air in place, but the snow will be developing very late tonight in the pre-dawn hours and through Wednesday morning. Further east, Valdez is still getting some light snow, 25 degrees up there at Thompson Pass. There is a winter weather advisory for some snow and blowing snow. Weak low pressure continues to kind of fade away there in the northern Gulf. And then Skagway right now, partly sunny, 37, but clouds will increase with snow developing tomorrow, and there could be heavier snowfall along the Klondike Highway, especially as we get up toward White Pass as we go through Wednesday into Wednesday night and early Thursday. And that little dot of red is where a winter storm warning is in effect for the Klondike Highway and White Pass, where as much as 4 to 9 inches of snow could fall between later Wednesday morning through Thursday morning. And we expect winter weather advisories around Skagway and Haines, especially some of the higher elevations. At least maybe 3-5 inches of snow could fall there. Inch or two possible in Juneau before the snow mixes with and changes to rain. Now, further west, we currently have winter weather advisories in effect for much of the southwest coast, including the YK deltas up through the lower Yukon Delta, and that would include Anvik, and places like Dillingham, King Sam, and Bethel could pick up easily 4 or 5 inches of snow, with locally as much as 6 to 8, along with blowing and drifting, with winds gusting as high as 30 to 50 miles an hour. We also have a coastal flood advisory for areas along Bristol Bay, where water levels could run as much as 3 to 6 feet above the highest tides. And then as we go into Wednesday, that snow will spread eastward with the frontal system, and a secondary area of low pressure is going to form along Kodiak Island and lift northeastward along the Kenai up toward Prince William Sound and the northwestern Gulf. And this feature will enhance the snow over south central areas. We also have a wind advisory in effect for east central portion of the Alaska Range, including Isabel Pass, as well as Donnelly, And those areas there could see south winds gusting as high as 55 miles an hour. And then eventually a frontal system will push its way into the panhandle. That's going to bring the snow in some breezier conditions with some wind shear as we go through the day, Wednesday into Wednesday evening. Let's look at satellite imagery, and you can see the cloud cover, bright enhanced clouds along the eastern Aleutians down into the North Pacific. That's the energy that's going to feed the secondary low. The low right now we're watching is south of Nunavik Island. It's going to push into Kuskokwim Bay tonight, move into the southwest interior, and weaken on the west side of the Alaska Range. It's the secondary low that develops on Wednesday morning near Kodiak Island that's going to deepen further and head northeastward and right up along the shoreline there of the Kenai Peninsula into Prince William Sound by Wednesday night into early Thursday morning. So that system will be probably the one that has the most moisture we see here for the next several days. Further north in through the interior, we expect the cold weather to continue. The cold air will hold with areas of lighter snow and flurries continuing through the rest of this week. So here is the low this afternoon in the southeastern Bering, approaching Kuskokwim Bay as it works its way into the interior. It'll begin to weaken late tonight, early tomorrow morning as a secondary low develops there near Kodiak Island. The low then rides up, just near Seward and up and toward the Prince William Sound by Wednesday afternoon and into Wednesday evening. Snow will be associated with this feature. Some of it could be on the heavier side, and there could be several inches of accumulation, say in the Sitna Valley, areas around the Kenai Peninsula and around Prince William Sound, also into the northern panhandle. And as that occluded front moves in, that should cause at least the heavier precipitation to end over the panhandle as we go into the day on Thursday. Looking at low temperatures tonight, below freezing many areas of south central except for along the immediate Gulf Coast. Could be as cold as near zero there at Glen Allen. And then temperatures Wednesday afternoon should generally be well into the 30s to even some lower 40s outer coast of the panhandle. 45 at Kodiak, but temperatures generally below freezing north and west of Anchorage. And as much as 1 to 4 inches of snow could fall in the Anchorage Bowl from late Wednesday morning through Wednesday evening. And we see temperatures Thursday morning moderating, generally above freezing in the panhandle, but colder there throughout areas of the Mat-Su Valley, Copper River Basin. And then temperatures Thursday afternoon should generally be below freezing, Anchorage, western Kenai, on up into the Copper River Basin, with readings into the lower mid-40s there across the outer and southern part of the panhandle. Cold temperatures across the far north, single digits above and below zero common, 10 to 15 below Arctic Village, Yukon Flats, teens, Seward Peninsula around Nome, and as we go into Wednesday afternoon, temperatures generally in the teens along the Yukon River, 20 Seward Peninsula, single digits Brooks Range, North Slope, parts of the Arctic coast. Again, single digits above and below zero Thursday morning, and Thursday afternoon highs generally in the teens for the interior, 20s along the outer coast there, lower Chukchi Sea down through Norton Sound, and then across the southwest Wednesday morning, lows could be in the single digits the further we get up the Yukon River, but otherwise, Bethel 18, near and just above 20 along the southwest coast, the Kuskokwim and Bristol Bay areas, 30s above freezing Alaska Peninsula and Aleutians. Wednesday afternoon, we're looking at high temperatures that are going to be rather chilly as we creep up the Yukon River in the teens and 20s. Still some 30s near and just above freezing, say around King Salmon southwestward, with 40 to low 40s extending out along the Alaska Peninsula and the Aleutians. And then morning lows Thursday, single digits through the Kuskokwim and Yukon basins as you ride up the middle and upper portion of those basins. And daytime highs generally in the 20s for the southwest interior west of the Alaska Range. We could see readings back up near 40, say from around Cold Bay westward, getting into the lower 40s out through the Aleutians. So here's the temperature outlook November 7th through the 11th, and we expect below to much below normal temperatures over the southeast and panhandle, but moderating and warmer temperatures along the west coast and up toward the Arctic coast from areas like Hooper Bay on up through Nome, Utqiagvik, and precipitation is expected to generally be below normal across much of the state, focused on the southeast.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
It's now time to take a look at your aviation weather if you have a flight planned either on Wednesday or Thursday. The main weather feature we are watching is an area of low pressure pushing into the southeastern Bering and will come ashore Kuskokwim Bay along the southwestern coast. There are winter weather advisories in effect there for snow, as well as coastal flood advisories for areas of Bristol Bay. And as that system works its way east, a frontal system will cut across the Alaska Peninsula and then induce a secondary low development that'll take place around Kodiak Island, and that'll become the dominant low as the western low weakens, and then the low moves up along through the northwestern Gulf to near Prince William Sound. That's going to force a frontal boundary in through the Panhandle, and as a result, we expect winter weather conditions, especially for inland areas and up through the mountains, to progress eastward with time. Further north, IFR conditions along the Arctic coast, particularly around Wainwright and around Utqiagvik for Wednesday morning, but otherwise widespread IFR across the southwest interior from Nunavik Island eastward to south side of the Alaska Range into Prince William Sound. Wednesday afternoon, we see a band of IFR extending from the central Arctic coast down through the central areas of the Brooks Range, middle Yukon Valley, in through the western half of the Alaska Range, and then extending eastward up into the far northern Panhandle. Thursday morning, widespread IFR conditions along the Arctic coast down through the North Slope, as well as through the middle Yukon Valley along the central Alaska Range, and again extending along areas of the Wrangell St. Elias Mountains eastward through especially the inner channels and intercoastal mountains of the Panhandle Thursday morning. And Thursday afternoon, we still expect widespread IFR conditions along the Arctic coast, North Slope in through the middle upper Yukon Valley along the Alcan border, areas of the interior southeast mountains, and especially along the intercoastal mountains of the Panhandle and British Columbia. And at Tuvik Pass, we'll see MVFR conditions give way to IFR conditions on Wednesday, as will be the case at Adigan Pass. And then further south and west, just look for IFR conditions to be widespread there, western arm of the Alaska Range due to low ceiling snow, reduced visibilities, Lake Clark and Merrill included. Rainy Pass, also IFR conditions on Wednesday. Windy Pass, we'll see MVFR conditions prevail north of the north entrance, but IFR conditions through the pass and especially down there south of the south entrance. Isabel Pass, also kind of a split MVFR to the north. Look for IFR, especially in through the morning in areas south, giving way to MVFR conditions by Wednesday midday and afternoon. And Mentasta Pass should generally see MVFR conditions become VFR, with more in the way of MVFR conditions there remaining just south there of the south entrance. Tanita Pass, IFR conditions expected on Wednesday, as will Portage Pass be socked in there with IFR conditions. Further eastward, Chilkoot and White in the far north end of the Panhandle will see IFR conditions, and those IFR conditions will expand as we go into Wednesday night and on Thursday, with an increasing likelihood of accumulating snows. So freezing levels across the region, surface freezing line down into the northern Gulf and across the Alaska Peninsula back out toward the central Bering, and those freezing levels bump up aloft 2, 4, 6, 8, 10,000 feet as you head down through the western Gulf into the North Pacific in association with that frontal system working its way eastward. Greatest threat for icing, considerable moderate icing, potentially along areas of the western Alaska Range, lower Cook Inlet across the northwestern and northern into the central Gulf, 6,000 to 14,000 feet, with that denser cloud cover and area moisture associated with the precipitation and frontal system working its way eastward. 2,000 to 8,000 feet out over the central Bering and above 4,000 feet in the southwest. Jet core winds at 30,000 feet, 170 knot westerly wind jet core. They're located above western Gulf, Kodiak Island, the Alaska Peninsula. At 700 millibars, 9,000 feet, we see winds from the south-southwest coming inland up through the southeast interior down through the Panhandle, a broad area of stronger winds through the lower Gulf and North Pacific, upwards of 85 knots there south of the Alaska Peninsula, and then a broad area of winds 40 to 50 knots out over the western Gulf, Alaska Peninsula. And we see 45 to 60 knot winds approaching the Panhandle. That will translate to the possibility of severe turbulence, surface to 6,000 feet just off the Panhandle coast, along with some low-level wind shear, and then another pocket of isolated severe turbulence possible there around the entrance of Cook Inlet, surface to 4,000 feet.
So that Galena flood back in 2013 was at the intersection of weather and climate. Rick, I often get questions about the difference between weather and climate. How do you distinguish between the two?
Well, that's a really good question, John. One of the analogies that I like to use, the wardrobe analogy. So in my closet, in my dresser, I've got clothes appropriate for 90-degree weather and 50 below weather. That's the climate part of my wardrobe. But what I'm going to put on today, am I going to wear my Hawaiian shirt because it's going to be a hot July day, or am I going to wear my bunny boots because it's going to be 50 below? That's the weather part of my wardrobe.
You know, there's another interesting analogy. I've heard it said that climate is like your personality, whereas weather is like the mood you're in today. It's like that old John Denver song. Some days are diamonds and some days are stones. That's how weather works.
Of course, it's really a continuous range. Just as the Galena ice jam flooding was the result of a weather event, that ice jam, up against that cold spring, a climate event. So too with less impactful events. For instance, a daily record high temperature is a weather event, one day's high. But we put that in a climate context, say comparing to a century or more of individual temperatures on a given date.
So these extreme events like record high temperatures also happen on the seasonal time scale. Just in the last few years, we've had what was called a marine heat wave in the waters south of Alaska, the Gulf of Alaska and the Bering Sea. With the water temperatures in that area set new records in 2015 and 2016.
And most Alaskans are acutely aware that big wildfire seasons are becoming more and more common, most recently in 2015, and the frequency of million-acre seasons has doubled since the early 1990s.
Just this past winter, we had another event in the Bering Sea. The ice extent in the Bering was lower than it had ever been in the last 150 years. That's about as far back as the good records go. There'd never been another year like this one in the Bering with so little sea ice. That had major impacts on the communities along the west coast and the northwest coast.
So, John, what have you been hearing from folks around town about these kind of climate extremes?
I've heard from a number of people who've been here a long time that winters just aren't what they used to be. The average temperatures are higher than they were back in the 1960s and 1970s, and we just don't get the extreme cold days, the days down in the minus 50s or even the minus 60s that we used to experience in Fairbanks back in the 1960s, 1970s, and even into the 1980s.
Well, and it's not just winter either. 2016 and 2017, the summers brought unusually muggy, humid weather to Fairbanks. We're not used to thinking of that in interior Alaska, but record high humidities during the summer months. As in the winter, we've had a significant increase in freezing rain events, since about 2000. So much so that DOT has changed their road treatment strategy, and now we have the school district building in winter rain days into the calendar. And of course, we all need good weather forecasts for these high impact weather events.
But we know, though, that weather forecasts are sometimes wrong just 3 or 4 days in advance. So if these weather forecasts and the models they're based on can't pick up events like freezing rain 3 or 4 days ahead, how can we believe what they say about climate for the future?
Well, that's a really good question, John. And I think the important thing to remember is that parts of the system are predictable.
So climate models can't give you weather for particular days or even for particular months or years. They actually predict averages. These are averages over periods of a decade or two, or even averages over periods of several years. So they don't give us the month-to-month information that we might want. What are they telling us about the future, though?
Well, these climate models are telling us on the decades-long time frames that warmer winters are going to become more common. We're going to have more frequent, very low sea ice years with late freeze up and early melt out. And the same will be true on Alaskan rivers. We'll have more frequent seasons when freeze up is late and break up is early.
One of the other common threads in these climate model predictions is that heavy rain events and heavy snow events will become more common in the future. That's actually a prediction that the models make for mid-latitudes as well as for high latitudes in areas like Alaska. So we can expect the heavy downpours to become heavier and the heavy winter snows to become heavier than we've been used to. They're also predicting more frequent freezing rain events, getting back to what you talked about earlier. These events that might have happened just once every year or two in the past could actually end up happening several times in a winter in the future, according to the climate models.
And it is important to remember that even in a warming world, there are still going to be seasons and years that are colder than the average, but these cold seasons will become less and less common. So, John, maybe I don't need to have those bunny boots in my closet anymore?
Well, at least you won't need to wear them as often as you did in the past.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and let's look at the sea ice edge in the far north. Ice continues to grow. Given the very cold temperatures along the Arctic and northwest coast, we're seeing ice beginning to fill in more so across Kotzebue and into areas of Norton Sound. As we go further south, we see the ice developing as well as along the Yukon and Kuskokwim deltas, including areas of Kuskokwim Bay, and even a little ice showing up now in areas of Cook Inlet there in Turnagain Arm and up there toward Connect Arm. And this trend will continue here the rest of this week into the early weekend, given the cold temperatures that are expected to persist. Well, across the Panhandle on Wednesday, winds are going to be increasing. A frontal band pushing into there, snow and then far north, especially up towards Skagway, Haines, and the Yukon. And Klondike highways up through there could see several inches of snowfall. We're anticipating winds to be out of the southeast to south, 20-25 knots with gusts 35 to 40 knots near Petersburg and up through Lynn Canal. Outer Gulf Coast, we have gale force winds 35 to 40 knots west of Craig, especially Sitka through Yakutat westward, and waves building 16 to near 20 feet. For Thursday, frontal band pushes inland and weakens. Southeast winds for the inner channels 20-25 knots. Still could be some gusts to 35 knots around Petersburg, waves 4 to 5 feet. For the outer coast, generally westerly winds to 25 knots and waves 11 to 13 feet. In the northwestern Gulf, 45-knot gales in through Prince William Sound and south of Cordova in the open waters of the Gulf. Waves building to 10 feet in Prince William Sound, 14 feet off the Kenai. And look for winds, kind of a mixed bag through Cook Inlet, southwest of west, winds 30 knots at the entrance with waves of 7 to as high as 12 feet east of Kodiak. And then Thursday, with low pressure sitting in the far northern Gulf, we expect northwest to west winds sweeping down through Cook Inlet. Those gap winds at the mouth of Cook Inlet could be on the order of 50 to 55 knots with waves there building 13 to 16 feet. Across the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island Wednesday, winds will tend to be more westerly, 30 to as high as 40 knots on the Bering side. Waves running 11 to 13 feet on the North Pacific and Gulf side, and 16 to 18 feet, especially north of Port Huyton and Cold Bay. And then on Thursday, winds generally go out of the west-northwest across the region as high as 45 knots there in Shelikof Strait with 11-foot waves. Otherwise, 30 to 40 knot winds common either side of the Alaska Peninsula Peninsula, and waves running 11 to 15 feet on the North Pacific side and 12 to 13 feet on the Bering side. For the Aleutian chain, Wednesday, west to northwest winds as high as 25-30 knots in the eastern Aleutians, generally 20 to 25 knots, central and western Aleutians, waves 8 to 10 feet, North Pacific side, and 12 to 16 feet on the Bering side. And winds will tend to go more northerly through the central Aleutians by Thursday at 15 to 20 knots, waves generally 7 to 8 feet on the North Pacific side and 8 to 10 feet on the Bering side. And across the west coast, winds upwards of 35 to 40 knot gales out of the northeast, north and west of Nunavik Island. Westerly winds 30 to 35 knots, St. Paul, St. George to Kuskokwim Bay. Waves 16 to 17 feet there. North winds to 35 knots over Norton Sound. And winds across much of the region will become more northwesterly along the southwest coast and the YK deltas Thursday at 25 to 30 knots. Waves 5 feet in Norton Sound, 7 feet south of St. Lawrence Island, and around 11 feet surrounding Nunavik Island. And for the Arctic, east to northeast winds 15 to 20 knots, though they could be as high as 35 knots around Kaktovik. And they'll turn more northerly and increase 15 to 25 knots through the Bering Strait to 40 knots on the north side of St. Lawrence Island, with waves as high as 13 feet there. And on Thursday, we expect east to northeast winds 15 to 20 knots along the Arctic coast, turning north and then northwesterly 25 to 30 knots through the lower Chukchi Sea and on the north side of St. Lawrence, with waves running anywhere from 7 to as high as 10 feet. And the weather map late tonight, early on Wednesday morning, shows a secondary low developing near Kodiak Island. That'll become the dominant low as we go into Wednesday afternoon and evening, riding up along the east side of the Kenai, bringing snow to south central areas, spreading in through the Panhandle. Thank you for watching.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.